Sheila Carter had never felt a heartbeat pound so furiously, adrenaline flooding every vein as she sprinted toward the beach house, the salt air whipping her hair, her pulse echoing the chaos unfolding behind her. Ahead, Steffi Forrester, trapped in Luna's merciless ambush, pressed her back against the weathered wood siding, terror and defiance etched across her face as Luna's glinting pistol rose and fell in practiced menace. Around them, the crashing Pacific provided a cruel soundtrack, waves mocking the fragility of human life even as shadows danced on the deck in the dying light. Sheila burst onto the scene in a blur of motion, lunging forward with all the ferocity of a mother desperate to protect another child. A shot rang out sharp, searing, and Sheila threw herself across Steffi, the report so close it seemed to shatter the world. Time fractured. The echo of gunfire, the metallic scent of spent gunpowder, Steffi's gasp muffled against Sheila's chest. When the smoke cleared, Luna stood frozen, horror and rage warring in her eyes, as Sheila rolled off, unscathed but for a faint tremor in her hand, reaching up to cradle Steffi's head as if it were the most precious thing on earth. In that moment, Sheila was a hero beyond reckoning, a guardian angel who had risked everything. But the victory was as fleeting as the tide's embrace. Rumors spread through Los Angeles faster than wildfire. Ballistic analysis on Luna's bullets, taken from the crime scene before Sheila's arrival, pointed to Sheila's fingerprints on the casing. The forensic report, cold and exact, stated that residue indicated the weapon had been fired earlier, in Sheila's hands, proof that she had been on the property long before anyone else arrived. Whispers in clinical tones accused Sheila of staging the entire ambush, of orchestrating the peril that forced her to save Steffi for her own inscrutable ends. The same hands that cradled Steffi's face now bore the stain of suspicion, and under every glare Sheila felt the weight of accusation crushing her. Meanwhile, Dr. John Finnegan, torn between awe and dismay, confronted a mother whose mere presence defied everything he understood. Finn's mind riotously catalogued every fragment of memory, Sheila's monstrous past, the lies, the betrayals, against the reality of the woman who had shielded Steffi with her body. His heart fractured between filial instinct and professional oath. He wanted to believe the mother he barely knew could act selflessly, yet he could not silence the alarm bells echoing in his soul. At every glance, at every tremor in Sheila's stance, Finn wrestled with the chasm between devotion and doubt, prayer and condemnation. In the eye of this storm stood Taylor Hayes, her composure a brittle veneer over churning guilt. When Luna's call came, an ultimatum wrapped in veiled threat, Taylor realized that Steffi's safety hinged on betrayal. She would have to reveal her daughter's exact location to the one woman she had sworn to never trust again. Each syllable she spoke to Sheila over the secure line felt like a dagger in her own heart. "She's at the beach house," she whispered, voice trembling so fiercely she scarcely recognized it. "Don't tell anyone. Please hurry." As soon as the words left her lips, Taylor's soul recoiled, as though stained by the betrayal itself. She paced the corridors of her home, the walls closing in with every tick of the clock, waiting for news she both desperately craved and feared. And yet she knew there was no other choice. If Luna discovered Taylor's deceit, she would come with a vengeance that would consume not just Steffi's life, but every life Taylor held dear. Back at the beach house, tension coiled like a serpent. Steffi sat on the sand, the hem of her dress dusted with fine grit, staring at Sheila in a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. They were survivors, bound in that moment by trauma and triumph, but each carried the burden of suspicion. Steffi for placing herself in Luna's crosshairs, Sheila for the forensic evidence that threatened to recast her as the architect of violence rather than its savior. In the ambulance's harsh fluorescent glare, as paramedics tended to Steffi's bruises, a detective approached Sheila, badge glinting beneath the brim of his cap. He spoke with clinical detachment, Carter Ballistics report indicates this weapon was discharged earlier this evening, Miss Carter. An eyewitness placed you on the deck 15 minutes before the call came in. Can you explain your whereabouts? For Sheila, the question was a hammer blow. Her brow furrowed, jaw set. She struggled to weave a truth that could withstand scrutiny. The memory of her midnight reconnaissance, her clandestine visit to the beach house to leave a gift of jewelry for Steffi's upcoming birthday, had collided disastrously with Luna's cruel design. She had intended only love, only protection, not the storm that followed. Yet facts were facts, and in the black and white world of forensics, intent was irrelevant. Finn, restless in the hospital corridor, received the news secondhand. He stormed into the interrogation room, face flushed, eyes burning with righteous fury. You risked your life, he spat at Sheila, voice cracking. But you also left evidence that paints you as the shooter, not the savior. You have to make this right. Explain everything. Sheila's gaze, once so unbreakable, faltered. For the first time in years, she confronted the chasm between her storied past and the possibility of redemption. Her voice, low and raw, spilled the truth of her premeditated visit, a desperate attempt to reclaim a semblance of family, to atone through affection for a daughter she had never truly known. Finn listened, torn between professional duty and a dawning empathy. He realized that love, even love from someone like Sheila, could twist into obsession, that salvation and sin often danced on the same blade's edge. While the investigation tightened its grip, Taylor faced her own reckoning. News had spread of Sheila's heroism, and public opinion had begun to shift in shaky favor of the prodigal mother. Taylor, once the unshakable rock beneath her daughter's confidence, now felt the tremor of regret with every update. She replayed their last conversation. The fear in Steffi's voice, the promise to stay hidden, the lie Taylor had told to protect everyone. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and soon Luna's legal team, armed with surveillance footage and Taylor's phone records, filed an emergency petition demanding full disclosure of Steffi's whereabouts. Up in the sterile conference room of Luna's attorneys, Taylor signed the affidavit that revealed the beach house address in exacting detail, her signature trembling so violently that the pen's ink splattered. Afterwards, she sank into a chair, drained by the betrayal of her own daughter's trust and by the betrayal of her vow to never again turn to Sheila Carter. Outside, the waves rolled on indifferent. Steffi, steadied by medication and Will's comforting hand, gazed out at the horizon with haunted eyes. She had survived Luna's wrath and Sheila's bullets, yet now she confronted the final ambush, the realization that those she loved most had orchestrated her fate in ways she could scarcely fathom. Carter Walton arrived, his expression a studied mask of concern, yet underneath lay a ledger of debts owed and power seized in the chaos. He listened as Steffi recounted Sheila's sacrifice, then crafted a statement for the press that planted seeds of doubt, portraying Sheila's heroism as a calculated maneuver, a public relations masterstroke to mask her deeper sins. Carter believed in crisis as opportunity, in how the bold survive not because they are righteous, but because they wield fear like a weapon. As dusk fell, the beach house stood silent witness to a tableau of tragedy and tenacity. Steffi, fragile yet fierce, leaned against Finn, who had finally chosen compassion over protocol. Sheila, her hands bound by suspicion but her spirit defiant, paced beneath the porch light, replaying every choice that brought her here. Taylor watched them all, her heart heavy with guilt and hope, praying that the bonds of family could endure a tempest born of betrayal. Luna, in the wings of her own despair, prepared her counterstrike, determined to wield the law like a scalpel. And Carter. Carter smiled in the shadows, savoring the power that comes when you hold the broken pieces of people's lives in your hands. In this crucible of gunfire and forensic reports, of shattered promises and unlikely heroism, the Forrester legacy, woven through generations of love, lust, and rivalry, stood at a crossroads. Would Sheila's act of salvation redeem her in the eyes of a family she had tormented? Could Finn reconcile the nurturing daughter he knew with the monster she'd been? And would Taylor's fractured trust find repair in the light of truth, or would it crumble under the weight of deceit? Only the rising sun, glinting on the restless sea, held the answer, and it would reveal all to those brave enough to face the aftermath of survival. Eric Forrester lay motionless in the sterile white of the hospital suite, his breathing shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a fragile reminder that even giants can falter. The monitors beside him beeped with mechanical precision, charting the irregular rhythms of a heart strained beyond its limits. Down the corridor, Carter Walton and Zen Forrester Dominguez moved with calculated purpose, exchanging curt nods that carried the weight of betrayal. They had watched the Forrester Creations balance sheet wobble under the weight of ambivalence and growth, smelled weakness in the faint aroma of fear, and pounced. In boardroom after boardroom, they whispered disquiet into anxious ears, urging investors to pull their stakes, coaxing them to believe that Forrester Creations was a sinking ship. When the calls came back, voices trembling with doubt, phones cutting off deals and dissolving partnerships, they shared a private, victorious smile. Liquidity evaporated with alarming speed. Lines of credit were maxed out, cash reserves drained, and the empire Eric had built, brick by storied brick, teetered on the brink of collapse. Carter and Zend, allies of convenience, reveled in the chaos they'd seeded, convinced that it would clear the field for fresh opportunity, proof, they told themselves, that in fashion as in life, only the bold survive. Meanwhile, backstabbing intrigue crawled its way through every corner of the Forrester estate. Katie Logan, heart-pounding with a blend of righteous fury and suppressed spite, forged a covert alliance with Quinn Fuller. Quinn, ever the strategist, saw in Katie both the muscle and the moral justification to tip the scales decisively. In hushed meetings beneath the roar of eau de vie, Katie presented Ridge's most prized investments, the sprawling vineyards, the sleek high-rise leases, the artisanal jewelry lines, as high risk, painting them in dire strokes of volatility and impending loss. Quinn guided her, a whisper in her ear, suggesting the arguments that would sway even the most conservative banker. A stack of dossiers and spreadsheets changed hands, each page dotted with red flags expertly placed. They drafted the letter to LaSalle's private banking division, citing clauses in covenant agreements that could be invoked under the guise of unforeseen market distress. Ridge, blissfully unaware, believed he was simply consolidating his portfolio, focusing on the runway debut that would revive the name he wore like a banner. Then came the call that shattered the quiet confidence of Forrester HQ. LaSalle had frozen Ridge's accounts. No access to liquid funds, no transfers, no new lines of credit. The assets he'd believed would buoy him through Eric's convalescence were locked in legal limbo. Laptops were closed, phones left unanswered, emails piled up like unread tombstones. Designers and seamstresses, models and marketing teams, all paused in mid-creation, mid-sachet, mid-campaign, stranded by an invisible chain. Ridge stormed into Karen Spencer's law office, his voice a thunderclap against her polished mahogany desk. She sprang to action, legal mind assassinating clause after clause, piecing together an emergency injunction. But every hour spent in court was an hour during which inventory aged unsold, raw materials lost value, and the rumor mill churned rumors of insolvency. At Forrester Manor, the family's emotional defenses crumbled under duress. Quinn, triumphant but wary, watched Ridge's descent from the sidelines, her victory soured by the sight of a wounded Forrester heir driven to desperation. Katie, her cheeks streaked with tears she refused to admit were not all sympathy, paced the sun-drenched corridors, praying Eric would awaken even as she savored the hollow triumph of Ridge's crisis. Eric's daughter Felicia hovered at his bedside, her anguish raw, her faith in Carter's integrity shaken to its core. How could the man she once considered a friend have orchestrated the ruination of her father's life's work? And Deacon, back in the Forrester sphere after years of self-imposed exile, found himself torn between the pull of the company that had given him refuge and the shock of its betrayal by those he'd also called family. In the hushed chapel of the manor's private wing, Eric's wife Stephanie, her silver hair gleaming under the stained glass light, prayed for his life even as her mind raced through contingency plans. She had the Forrester name in her veins, and she would not permit it to be trampled by opportunists while her husband fought for every beat of his heart. Across town, at LaSalle's imposing headquarters, she confronted the bank's senior counsel, her trademark steel-eyed glare more intimidating than any courtroom. She delivered arguments that shredded Carter and Zen's machinations, citing precedents and legal doctrines until the lawyers, wary of the legal storm she commanded, offered a tentative thaw of the asset freeze. But by then, the damage had cascaded. Suppliers had pulled shipments, creditors had issued default notices, and the brand's reputation had slipped into tarnish. Mere release of funds would not dissipate the wave of panic that had already crashed through Forrester Creations. Ridge, desperate, convened an emergency shareholders meeting. In the cavernous boardroom, under crystal chandeliers that once symbolized unwavering prestige, he laid bare the truth. His father's illness weaponized by insiders, the asset freeze engineered by a conspiratorial alliance, the cash bleed threatening to end decades of fashion dominance. As hushed gasps ran through the assembly, Carter rose to defend himself, his voice measured but laced with condescension. He accused Ridge of reckless investments and emotional mismanagement, painting his own actions as tough but necessary stewardship in a cruel market. Zen added his voice, framing their capital withdrawal as a fiduciary duty, an act of salvation for investors rather than betrayal. The room buzzed with tension. Alliances shifted like quicksand as board members weighed loyalty against self-preservation. Outside, in the walled garden flooded with July sunlight, Eric stirred. A nurse drew closer, eyes darting to the monitor's erratic spikes. He opened his eyes to a world transformed, whispers beyond the door, shadows flitting across medical charts. As consciousness returned, his mind raced through fractured memories, the boardroom ambush, Ridge's anguished phone call, the legal skirmishes raging without his knowledge. He recognized the urgency of every struggle and the breadth of every wound. Summoning the remnants of his formidable will, he insisted on speaking to Ridge, to Stephanie, to every soul who had stood in the breach of this crisis. When he finally stepped back into the halls of Forrester Creations, his presence alone commanded silence. Reporters summoned by Carter's earlier leaks crowded the lobby, lenses trained, microphones extended. Eric moved through them like a tide, calm, remorseless, unstoppable. He called Carter and Zen into the inner sanctum, his voice low but thunderous. He offered them a chance at redemption, reinvestment under strict new covenants, public apology, and joint press conference to stabilize investor confidence, or face immediate termination and legal action for breach of fiduciary duty. Their confident facade cracked. Ridge, standing at his father's side, delivered the coup de grace, evidence of forged signatures, doctored memos, and clandestine bank correspondence. In that moment, the traitors were unmasked, stripped of titles and authority. But victory carried its own scars. The Forrester name, once the gold standard of couture, bore the smudges of betrayal and public spectacle. Katie and Quinn, their alliance revealed, faced exile from the company's inner circle and the unspoken censure of family who had once embraced them. Eric, though alive and triumphant, felt the burdens of aging heftier than before. The fight had drained him, reminded him that time was a merciless designer. Ridge, chastened but resilient, took up the mantle of leadership with newfound humility, aware that vision without vigilance was a pathway to ruin. Within weeks, Forrester Creations stabilized, cash flow restored, investor confidence cautiously rekindled, and a line of revolutionary designs ready to defy the cynics. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the skyline with a fleeting promise of peace, Eric stood on the balcony of his penthouse office, shoulders squared against the twilight. Beside him, Ridge placed a steady hand on his father's back. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. They had weathered the storm born of human greed and ambition, emerged battered but unbroken. In the hush of that moment, the Forrester legacy, woven of silk and steel, held firm, a testament to the enduring power of family, loyalty, and the unyielding heart of a man who refused to yield.